I started the recording, and we'll start with questions. Anybody has questions on any concept taken up so far from the 4Ps, SAVE, NCDV, segmentation, targeting, positioning? And I must say that this is an excellent batch, doing all their assignments in time. This time I could sleep through the night easily, and everything has been pretty good. Okay, so a good question, how far should we go in segmentation? I'm glad this question has been asked. The election scenario is a very unique one. The objective of giving that assignment is so that you could look at segmentation very, very deeply. But in generally any product, let's say an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 6, your segmentation will not be very, very big. So you'll probably have everyone in a higher income bracket who has internet connectivity, and some sort of segmentation will be enough. So you'll be able to come to one homogeneous segment, and then you can probably work on only the communication medium and the communication concepts for those 1, 2 or 3 segments that you identify. It is the election scenario where you basically have everybody who can be targeted, so it's pretty big. Otherwise, your segmentation in most cases is reasonably limited, and then you can. But yes, what I have conveyed to everyone is that there will always be an overlap. So if you say for Apple iPhone 5, let's take that as an example. Apple iPhone 6 has been just launched. What should be the segmentation? So I don't think you're looking at corporates here. You're looking at basically all individuals only, because it's an individual phone. So basically, if you see, income is a major parameter. Yeah, so income is a major parameter. And maybe age group. So just these combination of these two will give you the segment that you are looking at. Okay, so you get it? So you could probably say people in the age group of 30 plus having an income of probably 75,000 per month plus are going to be the target audience. So that will be your main positioning. Okay. So as someone has asked how targeting and positioning is different. So basically, if you see now, like we took the Apple iPhone 6 example, you segmented on age group, you segmented on income, maybe you segmented on lifestyle, and from that you came to 2 or 3 homogeneous segments that you would basically target. So if you see in segmentation, what has happened is you've taken 3, 4, 5 parameters, and if you make permutations, combinations of all the combinations that are possible within those parameters, then you will get a lot of segments. Those particular segments that you would like to pick up, that becomes your targeting. And the communication is primarily the positioning that you have. How are you going to get visible to that target audience? Okay, so that communication medium is not actually what people confuse as targeting. Doing the segmentation, making it exhaustive, multiplying it to the number of combinations, and then finding those target combination of segments and sub-segments which you want to believe are going to be your best catch is targeting. And positioning is how you are presenting your product and through which medium. That is the positioning part. I hope that clarifies that confusion. So in Apple iPhone 6 also, techies, like someone has written, is an important segment that you'll put. So in a sub-segment you'll say techies. And if you say techies, then positioning would be that wherever these techies are around, you need to be visible there. So within the social media, what are those places where techies are more commonly found? Within the outdoor advertising, you have a lot of places which are concentrated with tech companies and so on. So that's all your position. Okay, so assuming that most of the things are clear to this extent, today I'm going to take the other side of marketing, which is sales. When I say other side of marketing, it also implies therefore that sales is a subset of marketing. So sales is a subset of marketing itself. Although in many companies you do have separate sales departments, but sales still is a part of marketing itself. So today we are only going to cover sales management, and when I say that sales is part of marketing, still there is a differentiation for which many of the companies have reasonably distinctive departments. And this is because if you see this slide that I have just shown you, there is a corporate objective, there is a marketing objective, and there is a sales objective. My question is, are all these objectives aligned? I'm repeating the question, are all these objectives aligned? Okay, so I'm getting some answers of clear yes, clear no. They can vary from aligned to not aligned, and I'll probably pick up this answer more that they should be aligned and they should finally reach alignment, but they are generally not aligned in many cases. Can you give me some recent example you see around you where you don't see this aligned? Yes, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind are the Flipkarts and Snapdeals. The corporate objective is to increase profit, but that is not happening right now. The focus is on the marketing objective, which is to increase market share. Now, does market share only increase with increasing sales? My next question, it may sound a little confusing, but can market share only increase with increasing sales? Okay. So give me examples where market share can increase with a decrease in sales. Okay, so let's not confuse between sales revenue and sales. A free giveaway is also a sale, provided the person in front is going to use it. Okay, whether the revenue gets realized or not, it is still a sale. And in fact, that's something good that you all have picked up. Selling something free is far more difficult than selling something with some money. Does this sentence make sense to you? Selling something free is far more difficult than selling something with a consideration. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Okay, is the voice clear now? Okay, so let me give you some examples. Many of us go to a temple or a mosque or wherever. True? Okay. Now, if on the road someone is offering you something to eat, it's free. Will you buy it? Will you take it? So why do we take it very easily when it is in the garb of a religion? When it's a langar somewhere, or whether in the name of Shivratri something has been done, or inside a temple complex in the name of prasad, a person can give you whatever they like. Even diabetic people will eat that prasad because... So in general, why does this happen? So like this word's been used now, trust. I won't say trust, I would rather say you want to fix a responsibility on someone. Here the responsibility has been fixed on God. It is an assumed, you could say, assumed trust over there that inside the premises where God is supposed to reside, people will not do wrong things. But if you go back to several terrorist activities, many of them have happened inside temples. The Golden Temple is been the seat of the Khalistan movement when that happened 10-15 years back. And it is the highest, the most sacred temple for the Sikh religion. So, people would always try to use those accepted beliefs and faith for many things. And there is a society that comes into the picture over there. So you will never take for free, because there is always a question, why is it free to me alone? As soon as that question is removed, there will be a big rush to take it. Okay. Whatever is not easily available, that tends to get a lot of traction. So I'll take this example which we all saw recently of Xiaomi, the way it promoted its product. So they had a very beautiful product on paper, and then they said it was only for invites, and then they opened a registration, and within few seconds the thing was always open. It was always closed. Now, out of the entire group of people who used to do it, nobody really knew how many phones were actually being given out. There was no transparency of that happening. And one odd people here and there got it. Now the next catch in that is, if that person got it and he's excited and feeling good about it, and somebody next door or someone who didn't get it says, I'll pay you a 500 rupee premium if you give this to me, then he is more happy and he's not actually going to give it. Now take the flip side of this. You open the box and you're not happy with your product. Now you go to that same friend who said that when you get your box, give it to me for 500 more. It's an open box and you go and give to this fellow and say, okay, here's your deal, take it, 500 more. And suddenly the fellow says, I have run out of funds, because he sees that open box and something comes to my mind, what is happening here? And then you say, you're my friend, don't worry, at the same price also I'll give it to you, so you keep your extra 500. He says, I just told you I've run out of funds. So it's all committed somewhere else. And then you tell him, okay, just a one-day offer, I'll give it to you for a 500 rupee discount. And you can just see how the brand will come crashing down. Someone till 2 days back was feeling sad that he didn't get that product, will suddenly be the happy one who's saying there is some reason why this fellow is trying to palm it off to me, and I'm lucky I didn't get it. So there is a catch in whatever plan you make if it doesn't follow through to the end, but it's always the customer psyche that you're playing upon. So that was a good question there, and it's something to be kept in mind always, that selling free is actually much more difficult than selling for a consideration. On the other hand, look at a product like the apps that are coming right now. Because suddenly there is no fear of using a virtual app, so it only gets downloaded if it is free. As soon as there is a consideration, nobody wants to take it. Okay, so it's all about how perceptions are built. Most people will run along with the crowd, and they would not really apply themselves to see whether they are doing the right thing or they are not doing the right thing. So that's the way it generally works. Coming back to the topic at hand, we have these three objectives here: a corporate objective, which is to increase profit; a marketing objective, which is to increase market share; and a sales objective, which is to increase sales. Now, we've already understood that from the Flipkart example we've all seen, they are increasing market share, which is their focus, and they are having a higher sales, but they are bleeding money because on every sale they are actually making a loss. So that part is not healthy. Now, let's come to increase market share with a decrease of sales. When is this possible? Okay, Siddharth, I'll pick up your question first. Why sell more if they are making loss? So the objective over here is increase market share. When you have market share, the opportunity to make a profit from those customers who are with you is much higher versus not having market share. So when people start out, the only objective is to increase market share, and the belief is that the revenue model will then work out as soon as other efficiencies and other things come into place. So online has definitely disrupted the entire market now, and that disruption would mean that many other people would probably shut shop or have to change the way they operate, which eventually takes people more comfortable with the online products. Okay, and as soon as that starts happening, the profits can start coming in. We studied the NCDV model in the past. Now everybody knows a Flipkart, everybody knows a Snapdeal, and there are some more places where some experiences have started happening, maybe a Shopclose or maybe a Paytm or whatever. But wherever the number of experiences are low, the same thing will start working here as it worked in the normal market. That is, if Flipkart charges a 5 to 7% premium over an unknown website, the likelihood that no customer will shift from Flipkart to any other. So this increased market share is helping because it is allowing these people to trial. Okay. And every time that trial gives a surety, it works. I'll give you an example. My wife bought a pair of sandals from Flipkart about 2 weeks back. Now they have a major variation between their Euro size and the UK Indian size. So the size as per her foot came to 41 euro, but the Indian size was something else. And there were, I think, 3 iterations of sending it back and getting the product again. All the iterations were very smooth, and the people kept sending size 10, then size 9, then size 8, then size 7 till something fit. Now from a profit perspective, I am sure it must have been a huge loss, because 4 times delivery of the same product would have probably cost more on delivery charges alone than the price. But the confidence has been gained of a customer who knows that even a product which has a problem of size and shape and color and all those sort of things can easily be bought from here, because they do not have any trouble in taking it back, and there is a faith that has got built up. The same thing will not happen in some other place. So slowly the online products, from only branded stuff where people had lesser fear, have started moved on to other areas, because people are willing to experiment a little more. As long as it keeps coming to them and they don't have a loss, they're happy, and it's almost settling down now. So person knows now that this shoe size, if I finally put over there, I'm likely to get what I want. If I don't even like it, I can give it back. And it is very unlikely now that very easily she would be going out into the market to buy her shoes or sandals in future, because the kind of variety that she gets to see on these online sites is far superior, and the price advantage exists in the long run, because once the brick mortar costs are not in the picture and delivery costs become much easier because of better operations, the profits will start coming in. So focus right now is simply increase market share. Right now market share is increasing with increasing sales because the total pie is getting bigger. Okay, so I've already given you a hint. How can market share increase with even decreasing sales? So okay, I'll come back to my food examples. I have already shown you a pizza in the last one. Now instead of a normal pizza, if you have a smaller pizza, okay, and out of that smaller pizza you get the same amount that you got out of a bigger pizza. Has your market share gone up or gone down? So I'll repeat the sentence. The pizza has become smaller and your share of the pizza is the same. So has your market share gone up or gone down? Okay. Siddharth is not clear. Is Siddharth clear now? The market has shrunk, but your portion of the market has remained as the same as it was when the market was larger, which implies that your market share has gone up. Okay? And the market has shrunk because the sales has gone down of the entire market. So overall sales, even if they go down and the market reduces, the market share can go up. Now give me an example where the sales has gone up, but yet the market share has dropped. No, market share is not number of customers. Market share is how much does one brand get out of the total numbers that have got sold. So if we say smartphones have sold 1 million pieces and Samsung has sold 100,000 pieces, it means that Samsung has 10% of the market share in smartphones. Okay, now next time the smartphones have reduced to 800,000 and Samsung still sells 100,000 out of it. So the market share has gone up. And vice versa, if Samsung next time sells 150,000 but the actual number of smartphones that have sold has gone up to 2 million instead of 1 million, then despite the sales growing of Samsung, the market share has dropped. Okay? So these three different objectives is the reason why there is many a times a tussle between marketing and sales because their objectives may not match. Marketing is always interested in increasing market share and sales guys are only interested in increasing sales. Okay? But sales will always be a subset of marketing and the final decision, if there is any tussle between them, will be held of the marketing team. Any confusion till here? So let's go ahead. This is generally the 7 steps of sales which have been traditionally used, And on top of those 7 steps, I've also written what is more used now in the digital world, where we talk of top of the funnel, an engagement process, and bottom of the funnel. So it's quite easy to visualize. The top of the funnel has a much bigger mouth, and the objective in the beginning is to try and get as many people over there who could be the prospective buyers, and then take them through into a engagement process, and thereafter take them to the sales, the final sales, where you make the transaction of sales and the revenue is actually taken, or whatever is the sales objective that is achieved. Now let's look at the pre-sales part. The pre-sales part is the prospecting and the pre-approach. Okay, so what is prospecting? What do you understand by the word prospecting? So prospecting is looking for all the possible buyers. So identifying the prospective buyers of the products. This can be acquaintances, references, cold calling, retailers, newspapers, whatever. And here in lead generation, I have generally broken this into 2 parts. It won't be found in a book somewhere, but I thought that this would be a better way of explaining the different methods of lead generation. So I say one is finding the leads, and the second is being found by the prospective buyer. So both the processes are happening, that since someone needs it, therefore that person is also finding around. And at the same time, you want a customer, so you are finding for a customer, right? And all these things like the internet, the hoarding, okay, your websites and all these can be, today the internet is a very, very large medium for this. And if you're running a campaign, you're paying for campaign somewhere, you're trying to connect with people through targeted emailers and all those sort of things, that could be trying to find audience. Whereas showing yourself well on the internet, doing the search engine optimization so that whenever someone Googles your site, visibility is higher, all these can be in the being found category. Okay, so that prospecting is the lead gen part of it. Now what is the role of a technique? Okay, let me take the previous question first. What is cold calling? Cold calling means, okay, so you all probably experienced it already. You keep getting calls from a lot of places saying, I am XYZ from this organization and I am selling credit cards. Are you interested? Okay, so that's cold calling, which means the person in front, you don't even know right now whether he is interested or he is not interested, and you are simply cold calling and trying to find out whether the interest is there or not there. So you just pick up a list and start calling. A lot of these call centers do what is cold calling as part of the first stage of sales. The next question here is, what is the role of a technical pre-sale? let me think of an example here. So in a technical pre-sale, I think as a product which has much higher engagement, there is going to be a very active search by the user as well. The second characteristic in a technical sale is that it is unlikely that unless people evaluate alternatives, they are going to get into that very easily. So the role of a technical pre-sale to me would primarily be that whoever is a target customer or whoever is a person who needs, you have to be in those list of vendors from where a request for a proposal, RFP or something will be sought for. So in a technical pre-sale domain, the primary job will be to ensure that you are listed in all the possible places where the demand would come. The next characteristic of a technical pre-sale is that primarily it would be a B2B segment and it will not be B2C. So even in B2C, if you see, even a Windows sort of product, it's almost pre-packaged into the hardware, and it's very rarely that an individual will go out to buy a version of Windows or something like that. So technical sales are very predominantly B2B, and therefore the methodology of doing it will be very different. It will not be cold calling and all that. It would be finding all those corporates where you could fit and ensuring that you are part of the list of vendors to which the RFP would go out. Does that answer your question, Arindam? Okay. Okay. So in pre-approach, what are you trying to do now? You filled up the funnel with prospects. What are you trying to do in pre-approach? What does this word suggest to you? Okay, so what are you going to do research and homework for? What is the purpose of the research? What is the purpose of the homework? Right. So, as most of you all have been able to put it down here, from here on the sales process actually starts. Prospecting is a sort of mix. So let me cover that as well. Prospecting is a sort of boundary line where marketing ends and sales starts. And the major part of prospecting comes into the domain of marketing. But wherever the marketing and sales departments are not clearly differentiated, there the same team will be doing the prospecting part as well. But the boundary from where sales actually starts is after that data of leads comes in. Okay, so maybe I phrased it a little wrong, and Vishal, thanks for putting me right there, that the entire process is marketing, sales is a subset of marketing, but let me put it like that, the role of a specific sales team of the marketing body starts from the pre-approach part and ends at the follow-up. Whereas the team which is called as the marketing body separately from the sales body in most of those larger organizations will work up to the pre-approach primarily and will pick it up again from the follow-up phase. So the entire marketing comes under one set, sales is a subset of that, and that subset works from pre-approach to follow-up primarily. It also does some part of prospecting, but that is the boundary where these two parts of that body tend to shift roles. That clear now? Okay, still not very clear. Let me put it like that. So let's take a Samsung. Samsung has a marketing team and it also has a sales team. Now, in the broader context, marketing and sales together report to a single director, whereas independently both of these departments have their own head of departments. Okay? So what will be the role differentiation of these two teams which finally report to the same authority? That role differentiation is defined from pre-approach to follow-up. Okay, good Nikhil, you've given me a more technical answer here, something like development and QA. So they all will come under probably a production department, but development will take it up to a part, QA will do some other part, and then the final responsibilities of the engineering team itself. Good. So I guess now it's pretty clear the roles and responsibilities of those two teams where it differentiates and where they again come and meet together. Okay, anybody has any queries till here now? Okay, so let's go ahead. Pre-approach, how can we define the prospecting? I didn't get your question, Vishal. I think I've already defined prospecting. It's basically lead generation. So pre-approach is where we try to start customizing from one client to the other, whether it's B2B or whether it's B2C. In B2B, it could be totally individual, company to company, and in B2C, it may be a group of homogeneous clients, or it could simply be each individual one by one, depending on the type of product. So this is where the customization starts happening, where you would want to create a sales pitch which makes sense to that particular customer and not a very generic sales pitch for everyone. And to create that sales pitch, you should do a little homework, know what is the real need of this fellow, and to see how that your product fits that need best. And what we also write here in pre-approach is that it's also a place where you differentiate the prospect from a suspect. Now, what do you mean by a prospect and what do you mean by a suspect? Okay, I'll put the question differently. You are given 20 leads and you are a salesperson now and you are told act on these 20 leads. What is the logical way of doing it? So they're all leads. So suspect will not be converted into a lead. They're already all leads. You are given 20 leads. What is the logical way of going ahead on those 20? Okay, exactly, Bharat. Start with the best. So you really don't know which is the best. You don't know which is the most likely to convert, as Anurag has said. And this is the stage where you tend to put that. So you do a little homework on the person. You probably send an engagement emailer. You cross-refer back and see how many people have opened that email. Another way of seeing that is how many people visited your website, how many pages did they open, how much time did they spend on each page. So all that analytics now is the data which helps you start differentiating or creating a rating of which is the most likely to convert and which is the least likely to convert. So there is someone, whenever you send something, it never opens. Whenever you call 4 times, it is unanswered. 5th time, even if it's picked up, it said, I'm busy right now, please call later. So the message that you are getting all the time is that this fellow is really not very keen on this product and maybe later, but definitely not worth pursuing and wasting too much time on right now. So your objective now is to pick out the most likely converts. The others stay leads. Suspects are not those who will not buy. They may buy after a year, they may buy after 2 years. They continue to be your leads. They may be people who will just keep hanging around, seeing others, and may suddenly convert even without you doing any effort at all, because it is purely their decision when they want to convert. But there are always, you will see from the interaction and from the data and analytics, which are the most likely to convert. So that is the role of this part where we say pre-approach, which is we start ranking that this fellow is hot, this fellow is medium, this fellow is cold. And then obviously, because sales is the costliest part of this exercise, real humans being put, real time being put, so it has to ensure that you work only where the probability of success is highest. It is also the area where the actual revenue will start flowing in, and therefore a lot of money is spent into this part of the exercise. Then you come to the third part, which is approach. This is fairly simple. You have defined the ranking of people from most likely to convert to least likely to convert, and approach is now directly engaging with them and seeking an appointment. So that is the approach part. Setting up direct interaction, which can be telephone, Skype, Hangout, whatever. Then you come to the real pitch, which is the presentation and demonstration. You got your appointment, you go there and you make a pitch. What do you mean by a unique selling proposition? USP means unique selling proposition. What do you mean by unique selling proposition? Okay, so I'm getting answers: differentiator from competition, which others don't have, the differentiating piece. So this is something that you have already talked about in your product. What is the USP in a sales part? Unique selling proposition for whom? Yeah, so you are now at the point where you're talking of a specific customer. So you need to have a unique selling proposition for that specific customer. Okay, so if that person is more interested only in the camera part of the phone, then maybe you will emphasize only on the camera and its usage. If you believe that this fellow is ripe enough that if I give, like Bharat has said, some special offer right now, this fellow can take it. So maybe you will do that. Okay. So what we are trying to tell here is that when you're talking of your product, you've already started telling generally about what it is, and you started focusing towards what that particular person wants. And then you push in only on that. So if there is a student who wants postgraduate education and you have lots of courses including graduation, including undergraduation, you have all kind of courses, even schools and other things. So you can maybe tell in general that this is what we are, but then you are only interested in telling about that product which this fellow wants, and then you are only interested in that part of the USP which is making sense to this person. Okay. Then let's come to the last part. Why do you need to engage with the question? Why do you need to engage with the question? Let's make it more simple. It's not so philosophical. Let's make it very simple. Think of the processes you've gone through in sales. What does the question? The question is generally very, very simple. And what happens when this question is asked? So in most cases, when you ask a question, what is the answer that you get? Yeah, I think now I'm started getting that. More questions usually. So when you will ask a question is when the customer will actually wake up. Most of what you have said earlier has gone, it's got lost. Like when I take this class over here, you will tend to drift away. A question will be asked, some silence will come and everybody will wake up and ask the same stuff all over again. So engage with a question is basically a method of getting a chance to repeat yourself. And maybe when you repeat yourself this time, you are going to be heard better. And maybe this time the customer will understand what you are actually trying to say. And I keep saying maybe because you will again reiterate this cycle with another question in the end till more questions will stop coming. So you will generally be just repeating yourself one after the other till the person in front will keep saying, okay, now I'm clear of what you said. I've basically got a hang of what I need to know. So this will always happen for the simple reason that you don't know how much the other person wants to hear. And They'll hear, they'll doze, they'll hear, they'll doze. Every time they hear something which they feel they already know that's got irrelevant for them, they'll tend to drift. And then when the question comes, they will ask what they thought they have not heard, and then you'll repeat that. So, that kind of process will keep happening again and again. Okay, any question till here? My engagement time now. So how many people want to know what is pre-approach? So you go back to stage 1. So you have prospecting where you have lead generation, then you have a pre-approach where you basically identify who are those people who are likely to convert first and who are those who will be last. You do more effort on researching those people who are likely to convert first. Methods of pre-approach is very data oriented, which can be things like checking out the time spent on internet, the number of pages seen on your website, the number of emails that have been opened, the number of calls from the other side, the amount of time spent during the call, and so on. So you can have a lot of things. Then profiling data comes into place. What is the person actually doing? What is the likely need of this fellow? Okay, all those type of things are used when you get into pre-approach. Then in approach is basically finding the method of setting up an appointment. And then when you actually go and make your sales pitch is when you do the presentation and demonstration part, where you talk about the product, focus on the unique selling proposition which makes sense to that particular customer, and engage with a question till you believe that what you came to tell has got heard. Clear till here? Okay. So the first rule in a presentation is tell them. What is the second rule? The first rule is tell them. What is the second rule? So second rule is tell them. Now what is the third rule? Very good. Everyone is a fast learner here. So all fast learners here, you first tell them what you came to tell them. Then you tell them what you really want to tell them. And then you tell them what you have already told them. Okay, so you tell them what you came to tell them, then you tell them what you need to tell them, then you tell them what you have already told them. and these three things are actually different. Okay, so if you look in a book, the first tell them is the index or the content of the chapters. Then the main body of the book is the second tell them, and in the last is the summary of the book, which is the third tell them. And there are many people who don't read the full book. They only tend to read the chapter list. They end up reading the summary, and they are all knowledgeable and tell everybody that I have read that book, because it generally gives them enough material to talk about. Okay, so but these are there. This is the general rules anywhere. If you go to a meeting, the agenda of the meeting is the first tell them, the actual meeting is the second tell them, and then the minutes of the meeting is the third tell them. Okay, if you go to a lecture, the pre-notes or what you need to read is the first, the actual presentation is the second, the follow-up assignment or whatever is the third. So it's the same rule anywhere, and even if you write a test, exam, whatever, you can be rest assured that if you repeat 3 times, you're actually just following the rule. That is why in our country, the marks are given by weight in the universities, because more the weight, more times you have told them. Okay, so I guess it's clear till here. We now go on to objection handling. So we finished everything till here, and we've communicated whatever we have to communicate. And yeah, so the same tell them, and tell them, that's a nice way of putting it. Open the bracket, detail the stuff, close the bracket. So now let's come to handling objections. What are these objections about? What are these objections about? What do you think are these objections about? Okay, so again let's try and make it simple and look at what actually happens. Okay, so let me ask you, you have been, a salesperson has come to you and he's told you everything about the product. Have you ever asked the question, do you have holes in your socks? I'll repeat, have you ever asked the question immediately after he's told everything, do you have holes in your socks? Why? It's your question time. Why you're not asking that question? So the only common ground that you have now to talk about is that product. You don't have any other common ground to talk about. And because you know that the next part is going to be the sales, and if I start saying that everything looks nice, the price will go up and the negotiation will not happen. Therefore, we call it objections. So the common ground being the product, knowing that after this I'll be asked for money, so I have to show I'm not very interested in this. And to bring down the price, my method of negotiation is I try to build holes into it. So we call this process objections. In reality, most of the time there are no objections. They are just created for the sake of conversation. And now you recollect most of the times you have this. The objections also are a time where the same things are asked all over again what has been told so far. So when you will ask what are the questions, what is the price of this, can I buy now, can I give installments, you probably covered all that in your presentation several times, but the same question will be asked all over again. Okay, so I'm basically just repeating myself, so that's what keeps happening in that process. Okay, and recollect any processes that you have gone through in sales. All this is just engagement process where you keep getting engaged by repeating the same questions and the same answers and repeating them again and again to yourself, asking the fellow the same thing again and again till finally you believe now after hearing it many times that now I'm ready to buy. The best salespeople will understand quickly whether there is a genuine objection or there is just simply questions to raise a to raise some conversation and move to the next step. And in that conversation, they will tell you some more. So you tell them, and then tell them some more. So when those objections are coming, you're talking of something else. Do you know that Shah Rukh Khan also bought this item? Okay, do you know that, so many people use this item? Do you know this? Do you know that? Fellows asking about quality and you're talking about who uses it, which is a better way of explaining quality, because otherwise there is no way to explain quality. You go to cloth showrooms, they'll immediately tell you touch and see. Till date, I have never been able to understand how cloth can be touched and differentiated from another cloth. For me, colors are also pretty simple. You have a green, you have a light green, you have a dark green. But when you go there, you have so many greens that you don't know which is green and which is not green. So you have a peacock green, you have a semi-peacock green, you have a bluish green, you have a reddish green, you have a brownish green, and God knows how many Mirawala greens. So the objections sometimes are taken in a very different sort of manner. Yeah, and that's a very good one, Vineet. Black at least always used to be black. But now even black has so many blacks that you don't even know in black and white whether it has any sanctity left in it or not. So you have now jet black, you have a grayish black, you have a bluish black, you have all sorts of blacks. So clear objections handling? Yes, Arshad. Arshad, please put your question. Okay, so not very difficult, Arshad, when you All I'll say is next time you have 3 or 4 sales process of yours, just being a customer, observe what happens. And you'll come to know that how the person in front has gauged very easily whether you're interested or you're not interested, and whether your questions are specific with respect to something which you want to know or not. So let's put it like that. If you ask the price all over again, you are only going to be told the price as it is. But when a question comes, you told me this price. If I buy 5 pieces, will I get a different price? So it's not really an objection, it's a bulk sale request, but it will come under the category of objection handling. So you will know what to answer over there. It's a fairly simple process, it's not a difficult process at all. Now we come to the most crucial part, when the deal is actually completed. And when we say deal is completed, it doesn't mean that I am committed, it means I have actually given a payment. So commitment with the payment. What do you think will happen if that commitment doesn't happen? If it ends up just as, yes, I'm completely sold, but the payment doesn't happen. What do you think will happen then? Or let me ask you, how many times you have told a person at a shop, everything is clear now, I'll come back tomorrow to take it. And how many times have you gone back tomorrow? So I think there's a James Bond movie also on this, Tomorrow Never Comes. So if you reach the end and you don't have a final transaction, it implies for the sales team that you have to restart from zero all over again. So it's back to the first step and go back all the way again. Because if the fellow has gone, then he's not coming back. There are cases where people come back, they'll call after 4 days, and when they will call, they will always be associated with it will be always associated with an excuse. Actually, I was supposed to come back tomorrow, but when I went, I suddenly came to know that my company had sending me out, and I had to go very urgently. So, my flight was there, my train was there, I fell sick, all my 4 tires of the car burst all of a sudden. So some excuses will come. When those excuses come, you know that you are at the final stage again and this fellow can take off at closing directly. But otherwise, you have to assume that, you go back to stage 1. Okay, so that's why this is a critical stage. Any questions still here? Then I'll give you some more tips of this part on what it actually happens. Okay, so the sales people who are there on the ground always have some sweetener, so to say, in their hand. So they can plug in a free gift, they can give you one extra service free, they can, they can give you a 5% discount. They have some little buffer in their hand, and that buffer is pretty well defined by the marketing team, which we will study in the next session when we get into customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value. That this buffer that is available with the sales guy, see, this is the stage where he can use it. Now, to ensure that it is not given away freely, the incentive of the salesperson is also associated with that buffer. So if you sell this unit, you will get an additional 10 rupees sale. In other words, you're telling the sales fellow that you have this 10 rupee buffer. How much ever you give out is up to you to close the sale. And if you save something out of that, then that becomes your incentive. And this is what you would experience mostly at the time of closing. And you will also know that as customers, and when you are definitely sure you want to buy, you try to push for whatever negotiation at that time only. So will you give for so much? Will you give for so much? You'll wait to see who blinks first. And if the person in front refuses to blink, you will pay up the whole amount, one note at a time. And if the person agrees at some stage and says so many notes are enough in my hand, you will retain back the last note in your hand. So that's what happens at this stage. The important part is don't ever cross that line. Okay, the important part is don't ever cross that line. Whatever is the buffer you have in hand, you should not be going beyond that, because that much does not matter to most customers. So if someone says I got it for 100, someone else says I got it for 95, people don't really worry too much about it because they'll say something else must have been given to me or not. But if the variation becomes too steep and it gets known across different customer segments, then you will only be ensuring that your price effectively drops forever. So don't cross that buffer barrier that has been given to you. Okay, so now sales has been done. What is after sales now? Let me ask you a question. You have bought a life insurance from a life insurance agent. When he calls you every month for no reason and says hello, what is he actually asking you? You have bought a life insurance policy from a life insurance agent. Your premium is due only once in a year. But this fellow calls you every 3 weeks, and always he calls you and only does some general talk with you. What is he trying to call you for? Keep it simple, please. You are all going off track. Yes, Sana has got it right. Vineet has also got it right now. So it is impolite to ask you whether you are dead or alive. But basically every 3 weeks he's trying to find out that do I need to go and do something about my policy, or is it just okay lying here? And who would you trust to buy a policy? Someone who calls you once a year for the renewal, or someone who irritates you every 3 weeks and does unnecessary talk with you every time. Yeah, because somewhere at the back of your mind, you know that this fellow is concerned that this product is working or not working. Why I take this example is that life insurance is something where return premature will only come when you are not around. And if someone is not asking you in time whether you are around or not around, then others will never come to know that there is some return that is supposed to be expected, which is how it happens in most life insurance policies around here. I don't know if you have those statistics, but LIC Corporation, Life Insurance Corporation of India, has almost 16,000 crores in unclaimed policies till date. So I guess from this you understand what is after sales service. No, online guys also keep engaging you and keep finding out whether you open, reply, you don't reply, what do you do? Or if their mails start bouncing, then they'll know something's wrong. Okay, so you're asking for one more example. I'll make it more live for you. All of you go through that process when you take admission in PGPM, where you've gone through this entire sales process as it is. So someone has counseled you, then someone has guided you, then you had repeated questions of the same things again. How much do I have to pay? Can I give in 3 installments? Can I give in 2 installments? And so on and so forth till you actually pay. After you've paid, you are on your euphoric highest at that time, but I am very sure everybody has also felt some pain at the start. When you actually go online, when you actually log on to the portal, when some video doesn't download, when a WhatsApp doesn't work, and like in this session, someone has a problem where the voice of mine keeps breaking. Okay, so when that pain comes, you feel that someone should be there next to you, and at that time you generally want that person who's done the sales for you to be available to solve those small problems. It's just a very short period of time when those problems get solved, and after that you are as much part of it as anybody else. For example, when I started the session, you gave me the answer of how I should minimize my screen or something and solve it. So over 2-3 sessions, this time we are not concerned about gray boxes. And the answer has come from you all. So that small part where the salesperson should not forget his customer when the actual transaction has got completed is after sales or customer relationship building. Now again, as I said in the first prospecting part, that the two departments where roles and responsibilities tend to shift, that is the line there. This is again the line where that responsibility shifts back. So the role of the salesperson is not to do customer relationship building for years. The role of that salesperson is only to help you cross the initial pain, make you comfortable, and thereafter hand you back to the primary team of marketing who will then engage for after sales services, for CRM, wishing you on birthdays and so on and so forth, and trying to create more positive word of mouth from you for the future. So this is again the place where you hand back to that primary marketing team. So that's it. I've completed my session for today. Anybody has CRM is customer relationship management. Anybody has any questions now? I can take those questions and then I will quickly summarize the the third assignment. So Prabjit, I think the answer to your question has already started coming through. The grocery apps which were funded a lot and they were bleeding badly and were currently booking a lot of losses, many of them have started winding up now. So I personally do not feel that as soon as discounts are stopped, the companies will survive. It's the other way I feel. Wherever investors believe that the scale is large enough, wherever they feel that the operations are getting better streamlined, there they would tend to keep pumping in some more money and looking at the future. But a lot of people which are just Me Too categories and have got in with some sort of funding have stopped getting any second round support. So the next phase of startup has started in India now, where first stage funding on idea tends to be far more simpler. Many of them are just in the same domain as other better established products in different geographies, and only those will continue to grow who investors feel will be around and will be profitable over a longer period of time. Others will close. Yeah, it will be a consolidation where many startups will get acquired by bigger players as well. Okay, anybody has any questions? So what will be marketing plan for startup? Vineet, I will answer your question because you asked it, but my answer may not be something that many want to hear. There are a lot of people who have startups who have asked me what should be the marketing plan, and many have not listened finally to what I've said because they go to certain investors who say that forget revenue model, just tell me what's the idea, I'll put in money. But for me, unless you have a business plan which eventually tells you when you will make profits, when you will break even, and when you will start growing, it doesn't make any sense at all. So for me, a marketing plan is very complete even for a startup. Rohit has asked how much to invest in marketing for a startup. Again, my answer to this is that marketing is a function of all those things that I have taught you so far, and to the extent that you can afford to spend more on awareness alone, you should have a budget. Otherwise, spending left, right and center, blowing money, not knowing when the revenues are going to come doesn't seem to make sense to me. I'll give you a simple example. I have started up this campus program of someone seems to have gone out of mute. Okay. So we started this campus program 2 years back. Most of the people I have come across everywhere tend to say that a college sort of activity cannot even be thought of till you don't have a 10 crore budget. And if you look around you for several years now, even educational institutes have been probably outspending all others in the kind of advertisements they are doing. But we entered, or at least I always had that opinion that till you don't solve your product life cycle, till you don't achieve the experience of people, it doesn't make sense. So I'll put it like that. We started with a minuscule budget. Till date, we haven't blown 2 crores also. And our revenue cycle has already started. The first batch has already started paying up, and we will be getting back at least 50 lakhs from them. So I do not think that a startup like this, which has the potential to grow to any amount of colleges, will require funding of more than 5 crores ever. So somewhere I may sound a little radical, but this is the way I have always looked at marketing, that you don't just spend left, right and center. You spend when you have money to spend. So yes, if I also grow to this division to a place where we start generating 2-3 crores of surplus, then spending in marketing out of that 2-3 crores and consolidating your place there, creating entry barriers for competition makes sense. But blowing money without revenue has never made sense to me. So Akhilesh, your question is, what about the app-based business where they say money will come in future via ads? I think WhatsApp is the biggest example of this. $19 billion is enough to buy out Modi's constituency of Varanasi en masse. And till date, WhatsApp has not found any revenue model for their business. Even today, I know that even if they put 50 or 100 rupees over there, I think 70-80% of their people will just shift on to a line or a hike or something else. At the end of it, these concepts make sense. How would you make your startup popular? Start with a geography where you can find those trial customers who then complete the cycle for you, and you start going up in your image value. And what is the point of scaling too big if you can't handle it? Prabjit, I guess you would have your own opinion, I have mine, but to me, I think so many times the rumor mongering of WhatsApp trying to charge you has happened. And if they had any guess that even 50% of the people would stay back at rupees 100, then with the kind of population they have on WhatsApp, I don't think anybody would have even shirked once from taking that decision of putting 100 rupees there. When you have 44 crore people on it, 22 crores into 100, you are talking of $500 million. And that suddenly starts justifying a lot of things. But it's not happening. So I think we're getting into a slightly different domain, but okay, let me share a few things. Nikhil has asked, in a B2C market, people would only buy after they know you. That implies that no startup can ever work, but that doesn't happen. We started as a startup. The market was pretty bad. Nobody knew us in campus programs, and we came out with an innovative concept called pay after placement, where we take only an initial registration. Students study for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years we take the entire fees after they have paid, after they have got placed. And that cycle for us now at the end of 2 years has got complete. And if we said that 2.5 lakhs is what we had targeted as an average realization from each student, then currently we are above that. Most people have paid us in the range of 2.75. Our pay after placement model says that whatever is your salary at placement, you pay us 10 times that. And since most people have got placed at 25 to 30 bracket of salary, we have started realizing more than the 2.5 that we had thought of. Once the product is proven, I'm sure it's going to make a difference to a lot of people. We have a student this year who is a relative of an alumni of PGPM, and I'm sure slowly a lot of people will talk about it once it's done. That's why I say that when it starts scaling up and it has the potential of becoming very big, even then we won't have really spent too much out of funding, and we'll probably do it out of generated resources. Sure, I'll share the details. Rohit, just send me a small email on my this so that I'll share the details. I think it should go only on an open forum in a different perspective. This is not a forum where we are trying to market, but you want the details of this program, I'll give you entire details. In fact, we have planned to go in for our second funding round very soon. So maybe there will be some detail that will be sent out to all those who want to get into the funding of this program. An opportunity for small time fund to come in, and because we're not looking for very great amounts of money, we're just looking at a couple of crores. And from there on, we will definitely be in the positive domain. My email address is nituj.gupta@sunstone.in and nituj.gupta@gmail.com. I can share something very interesting with all of you. I haven't found anybody with a similar name so far, and that's why you can put Nituj Gupta @Hotmail, Gmail, Rediffmail, any mail, and it will reach me. Okay, so I think we've digressed enough. Coming back to the assignment at hand. The assignment that we have this time is pretty simple. You have gone through the sales process of PGPM. So now assuming you are the salesperson of PGPM and you have a target of getting 5 people into PGPM, how would you do it? That's just the assignment that you have to do. The tip is that please just follow the 7 steps and put all your thoughts into those 7 steps. Okay, so the assignment is that you have gone through the PGPM sales process, and now assuming you are the salesperson of Sunstone PGPM, you have to find 5 more people and convert them to PGPM students. And the tip is that please follow those 7 steps and put all your thoughts into each of those steps. Assignment can be in any format, PPT, Excel, Word, text, anything that makes you comfortable. So Hitesh, that's not a good question to ask. Do we need to do targeting and positioning also? Why should I say no is the question I'll ask you. The more end-to-end you do it, the better it will be. You've already seen my grades. In any case, I give 10. So Shaikh, what example do you want on this? Can I consider all 5 in a batch? Yes, you can consider all 5 in a batch. Then more numbers in a batch, the better. Okay, so that completes for today. There's another question. When do we start working on the group assignments? Please start working on the group assignments. You can already start working on them. In the group assignment, basically you have a customer acquisition cost, customer lifetime value, which I will cover next time. But you have another part of that group assignment which just says that if you had to remake the marketing plan, how would you do it? And for that part, I have already covered everything that I needed to cover. So that part of the group assignment can be started as early as possible. Yes, all 5 will always have different USPs, and even now in the same batch, each person would have a different USP which needs to be communicated. So let's wind up for the day. Thank you very much. And you all have made me excited that I might get my funding round cleared through you. So those who want to send me an email can do so, and I'll send you all the details. Campus is getting into funding now. Thank you. Have a nice day.